This is actually the 9th time we've conducted the survey, so almost a decade has gone by.
Time flies when we're having fun.
Yeah, so I thought tonight I'm going to actually share with you some of the long-term trends so you can sort of see things have changed since we've been using the core survey dating back to about 2006. Most of the questions have stayed about the same. But it's always great to come to Auburn because Auburn, frankly, is setting the standard for a lot of cities around the country. I'm going to go through the presentation today and actually show you why. And frankly, when I work with your staff, I can tell why because they're always asking lots of questions. I can tell they're actually prioritizing on looking at the data. And I know you as a leadership body are using it because you can see the impact that the results are having based on the residents' perceptions of the city. So with that, I'm going to kind of get started. I think most of you are familiar with the firm, but I think a couple of you may be new. So if you don't know about ETC Institute, we're based in Kansas City. We now have offices in Phoenix, Austin, and Chicago. We do work for more than 600 cities and counties across the United States, including 12 of the 20 largest cities and 11 of the 20 largest counties. City of Auburn was actually our first city in the southeast part of the United States. This map hasn't been updated, so we actually have a lot more cities. I think we have about 5 or 6 communities now in Alabama. You were the very first city that we worked with. So it's great to be here. I'm going to make a lot of comments with regard to how Auburn stacks up to other communities, and that's based on what we're seeing with our research across the country. As far as today's presentation, I'm going to go through what I like to call kind of the bottom line up front so you know what the major conclusions are. Then I'm going to kind of walk you through how we reach those conclusions. And certainly if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them for you. As far as the purpose, I think most of you are familiar with the purpose. The survey is done annually to really provide an objective assessment of what residents think of city services, what residents think priorities should be, let you track trends over time and see how you stack up against other communities. Frankly, without this type of tool, you typically hear from just a handful of people, and they may not represent what the greater public thinks. What we found through our research, and you probably just know from your experience, is most people who are happy don't come out to city council meetings. So as a result, when you're doing things right, it may not seem that way unless you have some sort of tool like this to balance the input that you're otherwise getting. So as far as the methodology, it was conducted the same way this year as we've done in previous years. Each year we select a random sample of 1,500 households in the city to receive the survey. Our goal is to get at least 600 of them to complete the survey. This year we had 675 participate, a 45% response rate. It's one of the best response rates we get from any city in the country. Typically we target about a 30% response rate as being acceptable. So I think the fact that the city has done this so long, dating back to I think 1984, and the fact that residents see you using it really is one of the reasons you have such a high response rate. In fact, I can't think of any communities off the top of my head that are as high as you. I think we have a couple that are close, but they tend to be very small, more rural communities. But 45%, particularly since you're a university community, is a big deal. The overall results aren't perfect. They have an accuracy of plus or minus 3.8% at the 95% level of confidence. And what that means is we did the survey the same way 100 times, 95 times out of 100 you see the same results within about 4%. So it's a good tool for measuring, but again, it's not perfect. But for the purposes of what we're doing, it's very, very accurate. With that said, everybody always wonders where do people live who responded, and you can see this map generally shows the location of the respondent's home. Where there's more houses or more population density, we tend to have more dots. Where there's less population density, there are fewer dots. We also look at the demographic composition of the sample, make sure that it was comparable this year to what we've seen in previous years, and it's pretty much right on target with what we've had in the past several years. In addition, I've shared with staff some of the breakouts, so that way if they want to take a look at the results by income, years of residency, and other factors, you can actually break down the data in lots and lots of different ways. So with that said, here's the major conclusions this year. Bottom line, City of Auburn continues to move in the right direction. You're going to see a lot of blue arrows on this chart showing that you're moving forward. You're clearly setting the standard for other cities. I'm going to throw it out here now. I'll show you in a little bit. But you set a new high for the overall value for city taxes and fees. It's a tremendous rating that you got this year. It was one of the highest we had before. This year you set a new high. So you continue to move right. As far as the overall priorities, the same top issues, infrastructure maintenance, traffic flow continue to be the top issues. But frankly, traffic flow is always the top issue in communities that are desirable. If people want to be here and you're growing, you tend to have traffic. And so it's how you manage it and manage expectations that's really the long-term issue. As far as you're moving ahead, I took a look at some of the plans that you have upcoming, things with parking in downtown, improvements to Opelika Road, parks and recreation issues you're taking a look at, and they resonate very closely with the needs and expectations we see in the survey. So I think you're going to continue seeing progress as you move forward. So with that said, here's kind of the way we'll go through things. I thought I'd start off just giving you some general perceptions that residents have of the city. I think you're familiar with the rating scale. We have residents rate many items on a 1 to 5 scale. 4s and 5s are positive ratings, typically satisfied. 1s and 2s are dissatisfied ratings. A 3 is an okay rating. It means somebody typically hasn't had a real good or bad experience, but they feel like they're qualified enough to rate the item. And so in other words, somebody doesn't say I'm neutral, they say I give that a 3 on a 5-point scale. And what you'll see here is generally general perceptions of the city. The two I want to point out to you are the overall quality of city services, which is the third one down, and the bottom one, the value received for city tax dollars. You might say, wow, value received for the city tax dollars, that's the lowest item rated here. But all these things are a function of cultural norms. People typically rate value of taxes low everywhere. In fact, in most communities, fewer than half the residents give positive ratings. Here in Auburn, 77%, or almost 4 out of 5 residents, feel good about what they're paying for their taxes and fee, given the value they get for that. Only 8% are dissatisfied. So for every person that complains to you all that you're not providing good value for the taxes, there's 10 people out there that actually think the exact opposite. So you're doing a great job. In fact, it's the highest rating we've ever had. In addition, when it comes to the quality of city services, you can see 83% of residents give overall quality of city services positive ratings. Only 4% are dissatisfied. So for every person that complains about the overall quality of city services, you've got about 21 out there that are actually satisfied, and they typically don't show up to your public meetings. So you're doing a very, very good job. In addition, when it comes to just kind of the hardcore image of the city as a place to live, raise children, as a place to work, one of the things that we look at in data is what we call brand equity. And that's when people feel really, really strongly about a community's brand or a city's brand. And you'll notice that when it comes as a place to live and a place to raise children, over 60% of residents give you a rating of 5 on a 5-point scale. That's a really healthy position to be in. Suggests that you're going to continue not only keeping the current residents, but likely attract people to be here in the future. So that's great for long-term property values and everything else. When you look at some of the major services that were assessed on the survey, this first chart kind of breaks it down by department, and you can see everything from the public safety, libraries, solid waste services, parks and recreation. I won't read the entire list to you, but what should really stand out here to you all are two things. First, there's very little dissatisfaction anywhere. You can see even with traffic flow, which is the area with the most dissatisfaction at 20%, for every person that's dissatisfied, there's 2.5 people that actually think traffic flow is well managed in the city. In addition, you see for code enforcement, though there's 11% who are dissatisfied, 63%, almost 6 times that many, give positive ratings. And you can see all the other services have fewer than 10% dissatisfaction. In addition, when it comes to brand equity for city services, we're typically looking for 25% or more of residents who pick 5 on that 5-point scale for key services, and the majority of your services have really strong brand equity. You can see everything from the school system on down to customer service have at least 1 in 4 residents giving you a 5. So just a tremendous position to be in. And the reason brand equity is so important is it can impact how well you respond in situations that might be difficult. Communities that have strong brand equity, residents tend to forgive the local government, think the government, wasn't responsible for the issue. And communities that don't have brand equity, they tend to blame everything for poor management or poor planning. And a good example that happened just a couple years ago in the Kansas City area is the city of Kansas City, Missouri had a water main break in early August. As a result, the local media covered that water main break. We do quarterly satisfaction surveys for them, and we did the follow-up quarter. Their satisfaction rating dropped 11 percentage points. 3 weeks later, in the neighboring county, Johnson County, which is just the opposite side of the state line, they had a water main break just about 3 miles from where the Kansas City, Missouri water main break. Covered by the same media, they both had to issue boil orders. Johnson County's satisfaction rating went up 2 percentage points when we did their following quarterly survey. You say, well, why did that happen? When we did follow-up research with people in Kansas City, Missouri, they blamed the city, thought the city wasn't prepared, the city hadn't maintained things properly. The city of Kansas City doesn't have brand equity, so they just blamed them for the problem. On the Johnson County side, they thought, well, it certainly would have been the county's responsibility because they maintained things well, so they were very pleased with the education and the fact that they warned people about things, so they got kudos for actually telling people about the problem. So one situation, you're a hero when you have a major problem. The other place, you can't win regardless of what you do. And right now, the city of Auburn has tremendous brand equity in many of the areas that were assessed. Next thing I want to share with you is just generally how the results are across the city. And I'm not going to show 100 maps to you today. They're available in the full report. But I do like to look at what's called service equity. In other words, are you making sure that all areas of the city are generally getting about the same level of service? And when you look at this map, this is the overall satisfaction rating with city services. And we have shaded census block groups in the city based on the average or mean rating of all the people who live in that census block group. And what you'll notice is the entire city is in blue. Most of the city is the same color. You actually have a couple areas in dark blue. And this means that you're not really neglecting anyone. Regardless of where people live, they might say that you serve one part of the city better than my neighborhood. Not true. For the most part, it doesn't matter where people live in the city, they're getting about the same level of service. There are a few differences for individual services, and those are actually identified in the maps. But for the most part, the city is doing a great job of equitably providing services throughout the city. In addition, when we look at some of the trends, the city continues to show slow, steady, long-term improvement despite the economic recession and all the challenges we've had. This is a phenomenal list because we've rated 68 areas since 2006. And normally I have a little bullet like here's the 4 that have gone up and here's the 2 that have gone down with significant changes over time. You'll notice that of the 68 areas that have been assessed since we started this core survey, 59 have stayed the same or improved. None have shown a significant decrease. And 45 of those 68 areas have gone up significantly. I mean, that's just tremendous that you've addressed so many issues in a positive way since 2006. Even more so is if you look at the areas at the top, things like street maintenance, visibility of police, crime prevention, some of the areas you've seen the most improvement in are things that have historically been very important to residents, which really shows me that you're responding to residents' needs, both with the communication and the messages you're putting out there, but actually also with the dollars and the way you're investing those dollars. And so I think you're to be commended, frankly, to have this much accomplishment in such a short period of time. In addition, when you look at the short term, you can see the last year, 50 of 72 areas we now are assessing stayed the same or improved. 17 were statistically significant improvements. We had a handful you can see at the bottom of the list, many of which were parks and recreation, even some perceptions of leadership, but most of them didn't result in higher dissatisfaction levels. In other words, what we saw is more neutral ratings this year. Oftentimes that can be a function of information. It can also be a function on leadership issues with what's going on nationally and things like that when we see some of the decreases. None of which concern me because some of those areas are actually the highest rated areas in the survey overall, and you're doing very, very well. So bottom line is you're definitely on the right course, both in the short and in the long term. These next couple charts show you specifically where some of the changes have taken place. And I want to highlight the one at the bottom of this chart, value received for city taxes and fees. This is one of the most important indicators, I think, in the entire survey because it's really, at the end of the day, people are paying taxes for services and what do they think they're getting for what they pay? And you'll notice in 2006, we thought 2 out of 3 people giving positive ratings was good. In fact, it was one of the best ratings we had seen at that time. You now have nearly 4 out of 5 at 77% giving you positive ratings. So just doing a great job of being good stewards and putting the resources that you get from the residents into the things that residents care the most about. In addition, when you look at some of the major categories of city services, take a look at the maintenance of city infrastructure. That's gone up 8 points over the last 7 years. Traffic flow, which has been one of those top issues for a long time, has seen steady improvement here recently, but you see dating back to 2006 is actually up 12 points. And you can see most of the other areas, you've got several areas. Public safety has seen a 6-point improvement. In communication, though it dropped 1% last year, it wasn't a significant drop. The long-term trend is still up 14 points from 2006. Within public safety, just hats off to public safety folks. Every single area that's assessed has seen significant improvement since 2006. And you can see there was also a number of areas that continued to see improvement just over the last year. So as far as making this community feel safe, responding to public safety concerns and the expectations residents have for these services, the city's doing a very, very good job. When it comes to feelings of safety, you'll notice these haven't changed a lot because frankly, most people thought the city was fairly safe when we first started doing the survey, and you've pretty much sustained high levels. Once you get to 95, 96%, you don't have much higher to go. So frankly, you've stayed within a couple percentage points in each of those key ones at the top, but you will see that in city parks, we've seen some long-term improvement. Same thing in commercial and retail areas. There's been slight improvement, though each went down 1% last year. It wasn't a significant shift. We've also added a couple new ones that we'll start tracking in the future, the perceptions of traveling as a pedestrian and also on bicycle in the city. And we don't have comparative benchmark data, so I can't tell you is 38% good or bad, but we'll be able to see how that changes over time. When it comes to your solid waste and water services, you'll notice that most areas, or the majority of the areas, have seen some significant improvement. You'll notice that curbside recycling actually went up a significant change from last year to this year. It went up 4 points. It's not flagged because the long-term trend is just 3%, but in just 1 year, we did see some improvement from residents' perceptions of curbside recycling. The other areas, yard waste and residential garbage collection, you can see we thought were very highly rated back in 2006. You've actually gone up another 9% in residential garbage collection and also 9% on your yard waste removal. So you're doing something right in each of those areas as well. When it comes to city maintenance, you'll see lots of blue arrows on here. This has consistently been one of the areas that's been highly rated as a priority in the community survey. It's also an area I know you've spent a lot of money and resources over the past several years. You'll notice maintenance of streets is up 15 percentage points since you first started doing the survey. In fact, you're now one of the best rated communities when it comes to the perceptions of your street maintenance compared to everybody else around the country, but you were barely average back in 2006. But 15 points makes you go from average to truly being a standard setter in that area. Your sidewalks saw significant improvement over the last year, and you can see a number of other areas have continued to improve steadily, a little step by step, but the long-term progress has been very, very positive. Your Parks and Recreation, this is a pretty busy slide. We redid some of the questions this year, so you'll see some of the tweaking in the language just to make it more specific. We're actually going to be doing a Parks and Recreation more detailed survey later this year just to flesh out what some of the needs and expectations are for the community's future. But you can see in many areas the long-term trends are very positive. Maintenance of pools is up from 48 to 61%. Maintenance of community recreation centers has stepped up from 62 to 63%, but you can see some of the other areas we've seen some decreases, but all in all, Parks and Recreation system's fairly healthy. When you look at traffic flow issues, you'll see ease of pedestrian travel, which was a big concern back in 2006, and there's still a number of people who identified it as a concern even in some of the open-ended comments, but you can see you're up 17 points as far as the improvements, and a lot of that's related to sidewalks and other initiatives that you've done to make the city safer and easier for people to walk around, and you can see that residents value those with the increased ratings that we got this year. City communication, one of the challenges for a lot of communities around the country is newspapers are dying. There's all these blogs and other secondary sources popping up. So to actually get information to residents that they'll actually pay attention to has been a challenge for many cities. The two sources that tend to be the most effective are your newsletter and website. But if those aren't doing well, then you're most likely not to get the key messages out to your community. But you'll notice that you've consistently improved in each area. Your newsletter's gone from 73% to 81% giving positive ratings, and the website's gone from 61% to 71%. And that's impressive because at the same time, expectations for websites have gone up. So the fact that you've gone up 10% during the past 7 years, at the same time people are expecting more from websites, really shows that you're keeping up with what the expectations are of people in that area. The item down here you'll see that's been a little flat is level of public involvement in decision making. And what I tell you there, we did some research for a few communities back in the Midwest a couple years ago, taking a look at, well, what does that mean? And what we found out is that it's not a matter of having lots and lots and lots and lots of meetings. It's a matter of letting people know when you have meetings and that they have opportunities to go to those meetings. In fact, the city of Olathe, where we're located, actually had a process where they had lots of meetings about their budget. And they thought this is going to be great. We'll have a lot more opportunities for people to attend, come to schools, and share their thoughts. Most people didn't show up. And at the end of the year, their satisfaction ratings actually went down. And they thought, well, what are we doing wrong? We have more meetings, and yet the ratings went down. What they found out the following years, they promoted those meetings much more aggressively, but they had less of them, and the ratings went up significantly. And what we found with some follow-up research is, frankly, talking to most residents have no desire to go listen to budget meetings or to typical city council initiatives. As long as things are going okay, they like to sit back and just let city do its thing. However, they feel like they have to have the access if they want it. So in other words, if they don't know about your meetings and what you're doing, they blame the city for not having good public involvement. On the other hand, if they know that those opportunities exist, they blame themselves for not going. So the real key is making sure people know that those opportunities are available, not necessarily having lots and lots of them. Next thing I want to highlight, and this is probably one of the capstones of the whole presentation, is just how you stack up to other communities, because it's really impressive. But this is a list of 60 areas that have been assessed. You rate above the national average in 57 of them. You rank significantly above the national average in 49 of those 60 areas. There's only a couple areas you rank below the national average: community recreation centers and fire emergency response times, but your percent of dissatisfaction, frankly, is very, very small. You just have a larger percentage of neutrals, and what we present here tend to be the positives. So this is just based on the percentage of 4 and 5 ratings. But you'll notice everything from cleanup debris, I won't read the whole list to you, but you can see value of city taxes and fees rates 30% above other communities. And that's really the most important indicator from my perspective strategically of your overall performance. When you look at some of these individually, you'll see here's how you stack up on the major categories of city services. You'll see customer service is 16 points above the national average. Communication, 24% above the national average. Code enforcement, 14 points above the national average. Your school systems, 31% above the national average. And you can see every single area of the major categories that were assessed, it ranks significantly better than other communities. This shows you the similar information, but we pulled out about 30 to 40 communities that are your benchmarking peers. This is actually compared to a national survey we do. This is actually compared head-to-head to other communities. And what this shows you on the blue bar is the worst rated city in that group. And the far right number on that blue bar is the best rated city among that group. And the vertical line's the average, and the orange dot is where Auburn rates. And you'll see in every single area, you're right at or near the very top. Particularly, you see your public schools are actually the highest rated one in the database, and you can see all the other areas rate above average, in many cases are near the very top. When it comes to perceptions of the community, these are the items I pointed out early in the presentation. Overall quality of city services. Most communities, only a little over half of residents, or just 56%, give positive ratings. Here, 83%. So you're significantly 27 points above the national average. And you can see that value for taxes, you're at a whopping 77%. And You know, most communities' goal is to be average on that question. So I'm giving you a presentation telling you you're at 77%. There are communities I go to that are down in the 20s and the 18s percentage, and their goal is just to be average. And sometimes when you're really a super achiever and you're in a bubble and you don't know what everybody else is doing, you don't really value what you've accomplished. To have 4 out of 5 residents give you positive ratings is phenomenal. It doesn't happen. Even among the very best cities in the country, you're setting the standard. So you have a lot to be proud of in that regard. And you can see here highlighted the fact that you're a new high. So you can see all those individual communities in your report that are listed, and you have the very best rating among them all. And you can see you're right near the top in the other categories as well. When it comes to perceptions of the community as a place to live, raise children, and place to work, you definitely have a strategic advantage against other communities. When you'll notice, though, place of work earlier, you might have thought, well, that was rated a little lower than the other items, but actually your community performs better than most communities as a place to work. You'll see the average is just 60%, you're at 83%. So even though 80% is lower than as a place to live and a place to raise children, your gap compared to other communities is 23%. So this is actually a very good place to work compared to other communities. As far as your public safety services, you'll see the fire emergency response times, the only area that lags below the national average on this chart. Oftentimes that's common in places that have concerns about traffic flow. And typically education about that is one of the ways to address that issue. But you can see all the other areas right above the national average. Your efforts to prevent crime, 15 points above the national average, and your visibility of police in neighborhoods is 17 points above the national average. And you'll notice the police in retail areas set a new high. And that's a real challenge for a lot of cities. They always ask, well, there's oftentimes dissatisfaction with the visibility of police. What does that mean? What are you doing? One of the things I'll be doing is telling people go talk to Auburn when it comes to visibility issues, because you're definitely doing something right. You have the best rating in the database, and you can see the other areas with the exception of the overall perception of local ambulance service, and that's just compared to the peer group. You actually rank above the national average overall. When it comes to safety perceptions in the community, you can see all areas rate very well. Your downtown's actually 21 points above what we see nationwide at 89% compared to just 2 out of 3 people in most communities. You have 9 out of 10 feeling good in your downtown here. And you can see again, all the dots are to the right. In many cases, you'll see a downtown, you're almost the very highest rated downtown when it comes to perceptions of safety. That may be one of the reasons you have a parking problem is people want to come downtown, they feel safe. And that's one of the challenges when you have a good downtown, you then have other things that go with it. And I'll show you some of the findings on those questions in just a moment. As far as perceptions of maintenance, you'll see your sidewalks now rate 20 points above the national average. You've made steady progress over a long period of time there, and many of the concerns people have had about pedestrian safety have started to be addressed because of your improvement in that area. You also see maintenance of city streets. When you first did the survey in 2006, you were at 57%, or actually 1 point below the current average. You're now 14 points above the national average, and that was one of the top issues in previous surveys. So again, I see this repeated theme of important to community, this city addresses the issue. Important in another year, city addresses the issue. I think that's one of the reasons you consistently get such good ratings is you listen to what residents' needs are and you prioritize your resources in those areas. And you can see now in maintenance, you're pretty much near the top in most every area that's assessed. Parks and Recreation, you see your community recreation center. I heard you have a neighboring city that recently opened one, probably affecting expectations here. So that could be one of the reasons you see a little bit lower, because these are all a function about what people expect. But you can see all the other areas for the most part rate better or significantly better than the national average. Your walking and biking trails are 19 points above the national average, and your pools are 12 points. The overall quality of your pools at 56 compared to 44%. And you can see on this chart, outside of community recreation centers at the bottom, you're pretty much above average. Even your ease for registering programs is slightly better than the national average. And you'll notice that the overall perception of your maintenance of walking and biking trails compared to your peer group cities that are in your benchmarking data is significantly better. And on code enforcement, This really is 36 points above the national average when it comes to how well you clean up debris and litter, which is shocking to me since you're a university community. Most university communities I go to have all sorts of problems with code enforcement. So it's going to be ironic that people are going to ask me about what cities do code enforcement well, and I'm going to tell them to go check out Auburn. And they're going to be, isn't that a university? And I'm like, yeah, so you're doing you're overcoming what's traditionally a barrier to having good code enforcement, and that's the fact that you have a university. But you can see you're 36% above the national average in this area. And you can see it's at a new high this year as well. So another theme we're seeing in many of the charts tonight. And when it comes to communication, you can see pretty much most of the area, all areas rate above average. But as I mentioned before, the level of public involvement decision is a little better. And it's probably more a matter of just telling people about the opportunities they have. Even this survey, if you promote it the right way, is an opportunity for people to provide input. But if you don't market it that way, you may be missing an opportunity to let people know how you're using and reinforcing the value that they provide in your decision-making process. And you can see, again, compared to your peer groups, you're pretty much above all the areas. Last couple things are your environmental services. Yard waste and garbage collection are significantly above. Water services and curbside recycling are also above. What's neat about recycling services is you were average or below average in previous years, and you now see you're actually above the national average in that area. And you can see again, recycling, you trail some of your peer cities. So even though overall nationally you stack up in the national survey, you're still trailing behind some of the communities that are in the peer city comparison that we did. So with that said, you're doing amazing, you're on the right track. You might say, well, what do we need to do to keep staying there? So one of the things that we take a look at are not only how well you're delivering the services, but what priorities do residents place on those services. In other words, if everyone was dissatisfied with something and nobody cared, if you went out and spent $1 billion on it, nobody would notice, or they might actually be mad that you spent money on something they didn't care about. So part of it is we do what's called important satisfaction analysis and give you a rating that essentially says if you had 1 unit of investment or time or education, every service varies, so you just can't say here this one will, 1 unit, $1 here would have this impact compared to $1 in another area. But the idea is, what's the overall impact of basically prioritizing your resources and efforts in one service compared to another. And you can see traffic flow and maintenance of infrastructure have the highest IS ratings, so those will continue to be the areas that residents care about, and you want to continue to make sure they don't deteriorate. You made a significant progress, but in order to sustain your high levels in the future, you're going to have to basically and people have expectations for what's there now, and so if traffic flow gets worse, infrastructure starts to crumble, that's going to cause people to revert back to some of the ratings you saw in the past. It doesn't mean things that, for example, like communication of the schools certainly aren't important, but the schools are at 94% right now, so frankly, you could spend $1 billion on schools and you're probably not going to make the overall satisfaction rating change very much because most people are already satisfied. That makes sense? So this is really looking for your opportunities so that you can actually enhance your overall satisfaction rating and where they exist. If you're more a right brain learner and you like pictures, this is the same information. This is for those who like lists. Essentially what we do is we plot out from left to right the importance of the service. So the items on the right are more important than those to the left of the vertical line. And as you go from the bottom to top, that's the relative satisfaction rating. So those up high have the highest ratings. Those in the lower part have the lowest ratings. And you'll see the things we look at are things in the bottom right quadrant. Those are more important to people and you're not doing as well in them. And you'll see that's kind of where the maintenance of infrastructure and traffic flow stand out. And you'll see in some of the other categories, I won't show you all the matrices, but in public safety, efforts to prevent crime and visibility of police in neighborhoods are 2 areas to continue to focus on. You're doing very, very well in both of them. You'll see you have a 76% satisfaction rating in each, but that's the thing to continue to focus on and let residents know what you're doing is they want to be safe, and oftentimes telling them what you're doing to prevent crime is the key to that. When you look at code enforcement, you can see the overgrown and weedy lots, nuisance animals, and efforts to remove dilapidated structures are the 3 areas that kind of rise to opportunities for improvement in that category. And garbage and water services, the material types accepted for recycling, actually a new addition this year. But you can see people now that they're getting more and more recycling services, or recycling services gets better, they're worried less about having the service now to a different issue about the materials that you accept. So as services change and evolve, expectations will also change, and you can see that's the issue that rose to the surface this year. When it comes to maintenance, streets and street lighting are the top two issues in the maintenance category. In Parks and Recreation, your senior programs, your community centers, your parks, and your biking paths are kind of round out the top issues. You almost don't have anything in the high priority category. You'll see senior programs is in there just by 0.02%. So it's pretty much you have most of your Parks and Recreation resources aligned the way residents expect them to be aligned right now. Downtown Auburn, this is where you have the highest IS rating on anything in the survey. You'll see it's parking at 0.5. And you see it's 5 times or nearly 5 times the next highest rated item. And of the people who picked it as a top priority, 69% picked it as one of their top choices. You see the second highest item is feeling of safety at 24%. So 2.5 to 3 times as many people are picking the parking issue. But that suggests to me you probably have a good downtown, because cities that can't get anybody to go downtown, they're trying to figure out how to revitalize their downtown, don't have parking problems. So it's a good problem to have. With that said, a couple other issues we looked at the survey had to do with development and redevelopment. We just asked folks with their satisfaction of those activities in the center. You see overall appearance of downtown rated very well. New industrial, residential, business development all had very high ratings. The areas of concern, though, the appearance of Opelika Road had over half the people give negative ratings, but I know you've got plans to address that, so that will probably address those concerns. And the redevelopment of abandoned and underutilized property had 41% giving negative ratings. So all in all, as I said up front, the city's definitely moving in the right direction. You have a lot to be proud of. You're clearly setting the standard. Value for taxes, don't take that for granted. 77%, it's like, leading the major, have the home run record or something like that in the major leagues. It's a big deal. Very, very rarely do I see a city over 70%, let alone at 77%, which is now the highest rating that we have in our database. And that includes a lot of good cities, even like Coral Springs, Florida, which won the Malcolm Baldrige Award for excellence. So there's a lot of good communities that we work with, and you have the very best value of any of them. Continue to focus on traffic flow and maintenance. I think those need to be cornerstones of your statements, of your education investments. But I also think what's great is I looked at some of your plans for the future on Opelika Road, which you're looking at in Parks and Recreation, and your improvements to downtown, and all of the issues you seem to be identifying appear to be very closely aligned with residents' expectations in those areas. So I think you should expect to see future improvements, at least a minimum sustaining where you're at as you move forward, but most likely, maybe I'll be back here next year letting you know you set another record on value. But you're to be congratulated. Great work, both to the leadership and to the staff. I just really commend you for what you've accomplished. So with that, I don't know, Mayor, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Anybody got questions for Chris?
Chris, I know we're talking